key things to sort of do, over the next couple of weeks as we sort of move from where we are into this sort of content milestone we're shooting for. Number one, just build out your table of contents. Take this sort of stuff from our positioning call. If you haven't done your positioning call, let's do it and sort of understand what are the arguments we're doing. No worries. But for Matt, for example, right, like look at that and, understand, is this the arguments I want to make? Is this the things I want? Pull things out, move things in. And again, part of it as you're sort of populating these sorts of things, you'll see. So for some people, what they'll do is they'll take that sort of positioning document and they'll actually start to put story content underneath each one, or they'll individual pages of it, inventory it. However you want to do it is fine. But the key thing to know is that for each and every chapter, you want to have those four things. What do I define it as? How do I describe it in more detail? How do I wind up putting the examples and the sort of the backup behind it? So start to build that one out. And then again, organize the content you have into that chapter structure. So what is that going to look like for you? And again, you could do these as chapter inventories or just notes for now to sort of understand what it is. And the last thing is, like, if you haven't yet written your introduction, try it. I think what oftentimes happens is these two exercises in tandem are really, really powerful. Because number one, you figure out the overall argument you're making. And then number two, you start to figure out the sub-arguments you need to back this entire thing up. Remember, a book is just making a big argument. And your contribution is really this concept of how you pull it all together. Right? Again, people have this imposter syndrome a little bit about how can I possibly do this? And I always like to go back to the story of Malcolm Gladwell. Malcolm Gladwell is not an expert in the books that he starts writing until he becomes an expert through writing the book. And that's the important thing, is that he is not someone who could sit down at the beginning of a process and convince you of what the answer is to the subject he's researching. Instead, what he does is he says, I'm going to go gather and learn these things, and then my contribution is how I teach you based on what I've learned. And that's the important thing when you're writing a book, is you're not necessarily trying to sort of say, I have all this knowledge today. It's that I have built all this knowledge, and my contribution is sort of how I package it up so you can understand it, so it's clear, it's crisp, and it ties to what we're trying to say here. So does that make sense? Yeah? You seem to question, you're doubting it. Okay. That sounds like it makes sense, right? Yeah, and again, I think whenever someone tells me like they're having imposter syndrome, I just try to tell them, listen, Malcolm Gladwell is writing like a journalist, and I think that's the style that you all have, is you can gather and learn as much as you want in those regards. So again, key things that we sort of talked about. Try to finish these 3 big milestones we talked about coming in. Number 1, content milestones, where by the 26th, get the 20,000 words of raw content organized in whatever way you want. Number 2, a draft introduction. And number 3, the draft structured table of contents. Whenever you have them done, just put them in a folder, tag me and tag Lynn, and that will be considered done. The key thing to know is that sort of now you'll be slotting into the next phase of this, which is how we build a manuscript. You'll be plugging in with about 200 other authors, so you guys will be meeting with them every week in your own sessions in that way, with the goal of getting us towards the end of February milestone. Remember, if you haven't sort of talked about these 3 things with your editor, use them in these next 2 weeks to get you there, right? That's the big thing. Like, tell them, hey, listen, here's what I'm trying to do. I got to run on this content thing. I got to get my introduction. I got to get this structure here. Use your time with them to really get to this point. And again, I think have fun with this last bit. Remember, we're not looking for how good the book is. We're understanding how you make the argument, what you want to say, so you can get feedback on it and understand sort of where it goes. That's it. So that is our adventure for this semester. But it's only the sort of the beginning phase here. We're in the next phase of it. So remember, this is just getting us to a point where we've got something that's worth arguing about, figuring out where it goes. And then the next phases are here to sort of pull it into a first draft,